Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's conversation on the YouTube Creators Hub podcast. Dusty here, the host of the show. I'm joined today by Julian Dorey from the Julian Dorey podcast over on YouTube. Over 426,000 subscribers, 370 some odd videos in. Has great success with his podcast over on YouTube, so I wanted to have him on the show to talk about that and the journey thus far. Julian, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Dusty. Thanks for having me on, man.
Absolutely. So tell me the origin story of the YouTube channel. Did the podcast happen first and then you decided to go to YouTube, or did it all happen at once? Kind of tell us the whole story behind that.
It all happened at once. I was working on Wall Street, if you can believe that, out of college, which was definitely not for me. I was not a fit over there, but I had gotten to a point in my career, like I worked hard and I got to a point where, you know, in the end of Wall Street that I was in, it's like you come out of college, you grind like a dog for 3-4 years, you make no fucking money, and then you come out and if you do a good job, they give you a contract offer. So I got to that point and I was like, I do not want to do this at all. And I was very close to my boss, but I'm just like, this is not for me. Turn down the money. And I was in the middle of like a crisis of trying to figure out exactly what industry I wanted to go into. And very long story short, while I was in that process, the pandemic started and I had been building on the side, like potentially like no plan, a little podcast that who knows if it was ever going to happen. But then with the pandemic, all my opportunities dried up. So I was like, well, shit, the equipment got there on Friday the 13th, the first day of quarantine. And I had forgotten I had ordered it. And I was like, what the hell am I going to do with all this? And then out of nowhere, I was just like, I guess this is a sign. I got to go for it. So I built for about 6 months around the clock, just built the studio, worked on what the hell I'm going to do for a podcast. I mean, I thought it was the dumbest idea of all time, still do. And I kind of went in where it was like do or die. And so I launched it publicly on all platforms, including YouTube, September 2020. And I have not left this studio since.
Now you're, 370 some odd videos into this thing now. Exactly what is the podcast? The Julian Dorey podcast. What is it? What do you talk about? What do you cover? Is it everything? What do you do there?
I fly in people from around the world who are doing interesting shit. Could be everything from a wild story to someone who's in the middle of the geopolitical sphere, like foreign stuff, things going on there. It could be my one guy, Paul Rosalie, who's a good example, like probably my most popular episode ever. He's lived in the Amazon for 18 years, fighting against deforestation and basically being a savage. I'll have on government agents, talk with them, try to get to the bottom of that whole thing. I've had on ex-cons. If I'm interested in it, I do it. That's it. And I sit down with people for a few hours and we do a long podcast that is just a conversation where cameras happen to be rolling, and that's it.
So it's really just a personality podcast. You're just bringing in interesting folks that are doing cool stuff that you find intriguing, and you're asking them questions about it, and you're putting it on YouTube and then onto podcast feeds.
That's right. I mean, it's really just, I can't speak for other people who do this, but I feel like a lot of people would agree with me who have had success with podcasts when I say it has to be something that you're into. Like I won't let other people book guests for me. I get offers all the time for people who would be great guests, but I'm just like, I don't know. I don't really fuck with that. Like, that's just not doing it for me. You know what I mean? It's nothing personal. It's just like, I have to be, like when you're talking with your friends, you're interested in what they say, right?
Right.
Of course. Cause that's what makes a great friendship. You care about what's going on in their life and you get connection out of that. That's what I do with the podcast. And then the really cool thing is, just having people come in here and doing this, you make friends with a lot of these people too. So the connecting is really incredible.
Yeah, an interview-based podcast like what we're doing now and what you do is one of the better ways to grow your circle of influence and to bring people in that can help you outside of the podcast and just kind of form friendships. And when you do conversations like this and what you do on your podcast, it makes a difference if you care about what they're saying, right? Because like you said, it makes for better dialogue. All right, so now let's transition. We know what you do. We kind of know why you started it, when you started it. Let's talk about now the YouTube side of things, because you've got a great designed YouTube channel. It's just your name, Julian Dorey, on the YouTube channel. You've obviously amassed a great following and community over there. What would you say would be a couple of things that you think have helped you along the way with growing the YouTube channel and the video side of things?
So there's three things that come to mind. The first thing is the shorts. I won at that. I was lucky to be in the right place at the right time. When I really started marketing this podcast, it started on TikTok in 2021. And I'm a creative person first. That's kind of what my, I guess, like talent is. And I voraciously study content from across the internet, all different things, including stuff I'm not interested in, because I want to know why. I want to know why people like it. What is well done about it. It makes you appreciate a lot. And so when I was on the TikTok feed in early 2021, I was really blown away by how horrifically bad podcast content on TikTok was. There was no effort. People were just taking clips, throwing captions on there, and hoping people would watch it. That's it, including the biggest podcasts. Like, I say this about literally everyone. I remember looking at some of the followings on some podcasts that had blown up on TikTok. I'm looking at their content and I'm like, I could do this in an hour. I'm like, this is not good. Like, all right, so how are we going to fix that? Well, now you got to come up with something. And so one of the things I figured out is I was like, well, podcasts are kind of like these documentaries. So why don't we make mini documentaries out of clips from the podcast? And there were other innovations and content ideas that came along the way that you started to pick up on that I don't need to go into. But I figured that out. That started to blow up on TikTok. But the content also started taking a long time because I've only ever had me working with me. In the last month, I contracted a couple editors for a second channel we're opening. That was the first time I've ever brought people on. They're doing a great job, but the TikTok started taking over 10 hours and eventually they got to 15 to 25 hours. I've spent 30 hours on a TikTok before, but in December 2021, you remember in 2021, YouTube was trying to soft launch shorts. And so throughout the late summer and fall that year, I would be reposting as native content shorts without the TikTok symbol on it. It was native content on YouTube of clips that were doing millions in some cases on TikTok, and they weren't going on YouTube, but they'd get like 2,000 views here and there. And I'd see the watch time was insane. And I'm like, holy shit, this is like way better than TikTok. And I'm like, come on, they got to send them. And then did like clockwork, beginning of December 2021, they started sending all of them. And they were doing 10 million, 12 million, 20 million, just crazy numbers. And so throughout 2022, the expectations were now high. It got a lot of other podcast creators' attention, and they started trying to do what I do, which was pretty cool. And so they started making a bunch, and I capitalized on that throughout that year. And now it's at a point where YouTube is trying to, I guess, go for some sort of kill shot on TikTok, which I understand. And so they want lower quality, high volume. So that kind of, like, my days have ended with that. I personally will not make something that's lower quality. It's like against my religion. Like, when I make a short, it's a movie. Like, and that's just how it's got to be. Like, it's just my personal whatever. So we brought on editors who, because again, I can only make a few a month with the amount of time that goes into it. And I do everything else for my podcast. So the editors we brought on are doing a fucking amazing job. They're basically doing a watered down version of what I do, but they're putting out a clip like almost every day, which is amazing. So that's what YouTube wants. We just started that last month, and that's growing the second page, the clips page. But the shorts thing is what put me on the map, because when you're doing, I had one clip that's like 46 million views and stuff like that, that gets people's attention. I had a guy in here, Andy Bustamante, last April for the first time. He had been, my buddy Danny Jones had found him. He had been on the Concrete podcast a few times. Andy is a former pretty serious CIA spy, if you want to believe he's former. And Danny called me up and said, hey, I think you should talk with Andy, because like, this is a topic you're interested in, and like, he's great. So I'm like, sure. So we bring Andy up here. And when he was after we finished the podcast that day, and I was like, why did you want to do this? And he said, dude, he was looking at some of my clips at the time with like 20 million. He said, you show someone with a clip with 20 million, they're coming. I'm like, really? Even for a short? And he's like, fuck yeah. And so I'm like, okay. And then he and I had a conversation. I said, well, what do you want to get out of this? And he said, well, it'd be cool if you made some clips. I said, well, we're definitely going to do that. And I joked. I was like, let's make you the biggest spy in the world. I made 7 clips. They did 110 million views and counting on YouTube. He got on Lex Friedman and then every other podcast known to man. And here he is. He's the biggest spy in the world. So the power of shorts was more than I thought. And I'm kind of glad I didn't know that at the time, because I probably would have overthought it, knowing my dumbass. But that got me on the map. And then what I started to do as I felt the algorithm starting to change and not getting as much of a return on shorts. And also the fact that YouTube started to split off long form from short form content because they were having problems with other creators who were making separate shit, meaning they make amazing short-term content that was just simple, you know, a shtick on a phone. And then they try to make 7-minute content to monetize those millions of subscribers, and they suck at making the 7-minute. So subscribers were getting pissed off because they're like, why is this in my feed? And YouTube doesn't want that. So even with podcasts who are taking content that's native from the long form product, putting it in the feed, they separated off that bridge. So I was like, all right, we're going to take my time that I spend on shorts every week and we're going to move that to the episodes. And I started making intros at episode 113 to the episodes that use like my editing skills from shorts. And that started to natively grow the episodes more and put me on the map and get some really amazing guests who I was really privileged to have in here. It's pretty cool to me that they come. But that was probably the second leg of it. I'm trying to remember. I knew I was going to forget the 3
So
things
let me just
off
ask
my
you.
head, but
Let me ask you now, just
yeah.
on top of what you just said. If you were doing it now, if you were growing a YouTube channel, I mean, you obviously are still growing, but you kind of get my point, right? If you're trying to grow a channel as a small creator now, how would you utilize all the tools in the toolbox that YouTube provides you? You do have YouTube Shorts. You do have long form content. Yeah. What would you do?
First of all, no shortcuts. When I tell people I have lived in this studio for 3.5 years, I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
I am so white, it's embarrassing, right? Like my skin is like so pasty, it's going to fall off. I don't know what the weather is most days. It's not healthy. Like it's at a point where it's finally coming, knock on wood, towards the end of that era. But I have literally given up my life to do this. It is a 7-day-a-week thing, and you constantly must innovate. You must do something different. If you don't do something different, go fuck yourself. Like you're not going to make it. Like unless you get lucky, you're not going to make it. You have to be willing to put in the time to innovate something, because it is so saturated. And it was saturated when I started. Now it's like, God damn it, everyone has a podcast. And it's always hilarious. Like when my parents will meet people who are like, sometimes like they'll run into someone. I'm just thinking of a couple examples my mom was telling me about recently of people that they met who are like reputable people and known brands or whatever. And they tell the people that their son does a podcast, and they're like, oh, he'll never make any money on that. That's no, he should give up. Yeah. And then they're like, oh, but he has 400,000 subscribers, and Michio Kaku just came over. And they're like, no way. And then they show it to him and they're like, oh my God. And it's because I found a way to do something different. It's the only way to cut through the noise. So I talk to people all the time. I really try to pay it forward when I see someone requesting like a call because they want to get advice and stuff like that. When I see it, I take that call. And without fail, every time I'm on a video call like this with somebody, I mean, this is a podcast, but when I'm like talking with them on a Google Hangout or something, and they'll ask me like what goes into it, like their face at the beginning of the call will start like this, and then they ask me what goes into it, and it goes like that. And I hate to say it, almost nobody who I've talked to has stuck with it or even started it when I tell them. Because I'm like, there's just no shortcuts. I don't know what to tell you. I wish I could be like, hey, you're gonna make it, but like probably not.
Yeah, it's hard to tell people that because that's not what they want to hear, because they want something now. Like yes. I talk to coaching clients all the time who's like, yeah, I just want to make an extra couple grand, from the ad program, or I just want to, make a little money. I'm like, listen, you're in the wrong business. This is not for you. And I talk to people about podcasting all the time, and we're very, very fortunate in that this podcast has become the #1 YouTube podcast. And we decided to do something different early on. And that was to bring on creators from basically all sizes and shapes and all different types of niches, and just have conversations like what we're having with you now. And we've done really well with that. And being able to separate yourself from that competition, from what other people are doing, is important. You are very good at storytelling. Watching your content, I can say that the way you edit, the way you communicate, your storytelling is top notch. It's important to be a good storyteller. You talked about you editing and turning those shorts into a documentary style thing. break that down for me. How important is it to be able to communicate and tell stories and have people emotionally attached to what you're trying to create?
Well, you just hit the nail on the head, actually. I appreciate that a lot. But I had my friend Sean Ryan, who's got a really big show on YouTube, very different from mine, but also long form. So in that way, it's similar, and he does an amazing job. I had his producer here for a weekend, I don't know, about a month and a half ago, something like that. And we were just going through content. And he was watching my process of how I do things, because they have a team and they can implement some of these
Yeah,
resources. And they're watching
right.
my dumb ass still try to do it all myself. But, obviously I'd figured at least a couple things out. But we started doing like a diagram of their shorts content, because their long form and everything they're doing there is great. Like they got that all figured out. But the shorts, they're like, we're doing fine, but like we'd love to go viral more like you did. I mean, we're a top 15 show on YouTube. We should be going viral. And I said, fuck yeah, you should be going viral all the time. And so I started looking through clips just in the order they posted them. And I'd be like, yes, no, terrible, great, whatever. And then I said, all right, let's play a game. He goes, okay. And I said, I'm going to go to your shorts tab and I'm going to hit the popular button. Okay. Which is going to put it in orders of views of all time shorts. And they had probably posted, I don't know, thousands of shorts. I said, it was big, whatever it was a big number. And I said, how much do you want to bet that every short over 1 million views that you have is a story? And he's sitting here. He's like, oh, hell no, man. No way. And I'm like, okay. So we started. First one they had, their most viral, was like 10 million. And I'm like, it's hilarious to me that some dude in his parents' house is doing 46 million and Sean Ryan only has one at 10. That's the problem. Like, this is what we're getting at right here. And so I said, okay, we click it. I forget how it started off, but it's like 1995. We're in Somalia. And I'm like, story. And he goes, okay. Next one, story. Next one, story. Next one, guy starts off and he goes, I'll end you. And he's like, oh, not a story. I said, wait for it. Next line, he goes, so then I walk out of this place and I'm staring this dude right in the eyes. Story. And he's like, well, I'll be dipped in shit. And by like the 15th one, it was like I just discovered fucking fire. And I said, people want to be told a story. They don't need your opinion on, the fucking election. They don't need your opinion on gender. They don't care about any of that stuff, because it is all, that's what everyone does. Everyone talks about it. Who the hell are you? Even if you're a big show, they don't care. People aren't going to be hooked by that. They want something that has a narrative to it. And so being able to do that with shorts is something that most podcasts, depending on there's certain niches, maybe that's harder, but you could do that. You could certainly work in the storytelling aspect, because I think it was Steve Jobs who said it, and I'm sure people before him said it. The storyteller runs the world, period.
Yeah. There's a reason why people like Mr. Beast are successful on YouTube. It's
Mm-hmm.
because at the beginning of those videos, he
Mm-hmm.
pays somebody a lot of money to have an opening line that just gets you, and you're like, I want to know what's going to happen. How is he going to survive this? How is he going to stay in this coffin for 224, whatever it may
Right.
be? So telling and capturing and getting people in. Okay, so a lot to break down there. Let's talk about business for a minute. You obviously do, you do this full time now. I mean, you're there. You're in the studio. You're putting in
I've
the
been
work.
full time the whole time, to be clear,
So,
when I was making no
yeah.
money.
So, and that's a good point, right? Like most people say, well, I want to make some money doing this, but man, you can't just throw stuff at the wall and do it every now and then and expect some money to come in. It's not going to work that way. So, as far as monetization goes, talk about how you're monetizing the podcast. How do you make money?
Yeah. So as a huge caveat on all this, like, two things need to be said. Number one, I put my money where my mouth is.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to get into numbers and shit like that with someone that's very tacky. But for the first time in my life, if I had accepted that contract on Wall Street, I would have had money, right? I'd always lived paycheck to paycheck, but that contract, I'll put it this way, a lot of money. I went to something that I knew I was going to make no money on for a long time. And I said, you need to assume 3 years, $0, right? Like this shirt I'm wearing is from 2017. It's probably like the newest piece of clothing I own. So I put my money where my mouth is. Number two, and this needs to be said, and I'm very, very adamant about saying this on all the time to people to remind them, in most ways, even when you're alone, you're never doing it alone. I'm speaking to you right now in my studio in my parents' house where I live, where for the first time in my adult life, I've not had a rent payment every month. If that did not happen, if my dad didn't let me back here to do this when the pandemic hit, to fucking go for it, I'd never be sitting in front of you right now. Period. End of story. I couldn't afford a $2,000 a month rent payment. I was scraping by on ramen just to get through to make this thing to get to a point where it was somewhat monetized. So like, chances are you're going to have to find some sort of support system too. Like when I hear of people who just completely made it, and I've heard stories before. I can't think of examples. I wish I could. I'm terrible at thinking of that, but I've heard stories of being homeless, making it with stuff like that. Dude, I'm so blown away, but the respect I have for that is, I can't even begin to describe it to you. But the rest of it, everything else that was then in my control that did involve my money, which is everything else with this podcast, it went towards this. I'm obsessed with this thing. If it's got nothing to do with this, it's got nothing to do with me, because it's a life thing. It's like, I got to make it. Like, I need to be able to get to a point where I can help people. And now, knock on wood, we're actually getting to that point with the podcast itself too, which is pretty cool. Before I was on this, I was on a call with a guy who had been in prison for 27 years for a crime he didn't commit. He's sitting in a cell talking to me, and we're going to be able to do a podcast that, knock on wood, is going to get some attention and get him the fuck out of there. That's a powerful thing. That's what I wanted to build towards. So to do that, to get to a position like that where I can do something like that, well, I got to build this thing, and I got to put all the time into it. So you ask about like the monetization. I told you I started building the podcast exclusively like March 2020. I launched it September 2020. For the rest of the year 2020, I made $0 until August 2021, when I really started to go viral and I started to chart on some of the Apple podcast charts. I made $0, and I didn't get any brand deals at that time. Like I had an affiliate deal early on because I knew someone.
Yeah.
You don't make any money on that, right? Like it was also for a $2,000 product. So you sell one like a year or two a year, you get brand aware. And the other problem is then people don't use the fucking link. I've had so many people buy it that didn't use the link, and it's like, well, I didn't get credit. So I think in 2021, from August to December, my first monetization, I made around $650. And then let me add in, there was like $350 in there somewhere from an affiliate sale, something like that. So call it $1,000. 2022, a year in which I did over 200 million views on YouTube, my gross income all in, including Spotify when that got monetized, because I went over to Anchor and they monetized Spotify and all that, I think my gross income was $32,600. And my expenditures on the podcast that year were 22 or 23,000 came out to. So we can all do math. That leaves Julian here $8,000-9,000 to eat before taxes. So, there's no money coming in. It's still right where it is. This year, I don't know what the number is going to be yet. It's going to be a lot higher than 32, but my spending this year on the podcast, we are in like the end of May right now. My spending this year on the show itself is already at $30,000. Money where my mouth is. You know what I mean? Like I just had my best 2 months ever for revenue. I have no idea why, but I'll take it. And a lot of the money came in and it went right out. But I still have never had a brand deal, which we should be fixing sometime soon. But that's part of like the whole being a one-man show and not having help with most things. Like, where am I spending my time? I'm also OCD as hell. My creativity is like, I spend way too much time on shit because that's just how it is. And that's also why the product, I guess, looks the way it is. Hopefully it's good, but the audience decides that. It's like, you have to manage all that. And I'm not the best at that, like clearly. So I should be monetized more. My income has been almost 100% from YouTube. I'd say it's probably like 94% YouTube ads, which when I just recorded with Sean Ryan, he's going to be the next episode. When I had him in here and I told him that, he literally got like bent over with his hands on his knees like he was going to throw up. And he's like, "You're telling me you've really only made money off YouTube fucking ads?" I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. We got to fix this." He's like, "Julian, I got," and I'm not going to share what he said, but he started explaining like some of his income at certain levels early on. He's like, "This is crazy. Like you're on the YouTube Global Podcast page. Why do you live in your parents' house?" I said, "I know why." try to get out of here. But I think it's finally getting to that point, is the point that, you know, will be more monetized. But it's not like, you know, the most monetizable content on YouTube is long form podcasts by view, because you have more opportunities where YouTube throws in an ad wherever they want to put it. But, you know, when I look at some of these channels that people think like people are just balling just off the video when they're doing like 1 million views or stuff like that, I know what they're really making on an 8-minute video. And I'm like, you know, if they have brand deals, now I know they're good. But like, if they don't, people think they're like rich and shit.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no.
It's such a smoke and mirrors, because what happens is I know a guy who's in the top 5 channels on YouTube for animation, and he's an artist, and he draws and he animates, and he gets regularly, you know, multi-million views on these very long form videos. There's no money in that niche, and so he may get like 1 million views but make like $100. And people think that they're just going to bank or cash out. That's not how this works. No. You know, for the podcast and what I do with the podcast, you know, my main source of income for this podcast is sponsorships and brand deals and dealing with people who want to come on and get in front of my audience that, you know,
help me
type up the page, you know? So that's kind of where I'm at. I want to ask you this, like the technical side of the podcast, you mentioned about going to Anchor and then that going to Spotify and everything like that. Just briefly run down your kind of your tech stack as far as, you know, where are you hosting your audio? You know, how are you doing all that? And then what are you, you know, how are you doing all that?
So, yeah. So to be clear, the platforms at the top, I've been on all those platforms since day one. So YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Google, and then it automatically sends it to a bunch of platforms I never heard of, which is fine. You know, you barely get anything like Stitcher or stuff like that. I don't know who the hell listens to that, but that's something. But the tech stack, I was hosting the podcasts on, we're talking audio side right now, on Libsyn until sometime like late last July. And what happened was Spotify went to video, and the only way you could put video on there was to use their platform. So I was like, cool. And then I went over, I looked at Spotify, and I'm like, why is nobody, or I shouldn't say nobody, why are so few people doing this? Like, this is a huge opportunity. And to this day, big podcasts aren't putting video on Spotify. And I'm like, this is very, very dumb. And now I have a rep at Spotify, and I know how they look at this and how they share podcasts and things like that. If you're not doing that, they ain't pressing you. So I went over there, and this was another thing. Apparently I could have turned on ads or something at some point.
Yeah.
Before that, I don't know how extensive it would have been, though, because I wasn't on Spotify. But anyway, when I got there, we turned them on. That took like 4 or 5 months because I couldn't figure that shit out. That was a mess. But then we got it figured out. It's not a ton of money. Like right now, I'm probably averaging. Actually, I should know that. I don't know. To check the account and I see what it is. But I'm probably averaging like a couple grand, maybe less than that. Because on Spotify right now, just maybe other people could figure this out better than me, but on Spotify, I'm doing like 95 to 105,000 downloads a month, something like that. Like if I do 3-4 episodes, right? So whatever that is, I want to say it's ballpark like $1,500, $2,000 a month at this point, but it actually wasn't that until recently because I didn't have their best advertising system in place, which is when you do an ad for their platform, they pay more on that. So I turned that on. What was that? Maybe exactly 2 months ago. And that upped, you know, because you make very little money on the ads that you put in, you know, just native anchored ads in there.
Yeah, I tried that when Libsyn rolled out like the auto ads. You know, we get, you know, thousands and tens of thousands of views on each episode that we do. And so we qualified for that. And so because of that, I tried to put in the auto ads, and I had so many of my long-term listeners be like, oh, turn that off. That's awful. It's terrible. They'll put it in the most awkward place in the podcast. They don't really care. They just slap it in there. I think it's getting better as time progresses. Okay. So I want to ask a couple more questions before I let you go. The first one is this. If you could start over, like what's something you wish you would have known sooner? Now that you've grown on YouTube, you're almost 500,000 subscribers into this thing. Looking back, what is something you're like, man, I wish I would have known this sooner?
That's the thing. I would actually answer that the opposite way.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm very glad I didn't know. a lot of this stuff. There's only so look, I was as prepared as you could be. Cause like I said, I spent 6 months building this, trying to get whatever feel I could, but you can only prepare so much. There's most of it is the winds of fire, learning as you go along. And I do. And I'm constantly learning things. I go into every day on YouTube assuming I know almost nothing. Like there's like when I say I know something, it could be something like, ooh, tell a story on a short. Okay, I know that. But like beyond some minor things like that, I'm like, everything's changing. You don't know shit. Let's try to figure this out. And I also do content where when I'm doing my content with people, I'm not thinking about any of that. This is where my channel is different because we do a long form podcast. I am present with that person. I'm not thinking of, ooh, let's talk about this for watch time. It's not like that. I wouldn't be able to do the product if I had to ever think about YouTube while I'm recording it. But when I'm marketing it and making clips, now it's like that, right? When I'm taking from the master file and putting it down to the minor file, now I can think like that. And so I meet him halfway. But as far as things I wish I knew, thank God I didn't know those things because I would have never fucking started. Period. End of story. If you would have told me when I launched, September 2020, if you would have told me the day before I launched, no, let's go back before that. If you would have told me the first day I started building this, Julian, approximately little less than 2 years from launch date, you're going to be #1 in the world in views per short for podcasts on YouTube. You will be reigning 6 months #1 in the world in that title. You will have, I'm going back in time right now to last May, right? You will have over 200 million views on YouTube total. You will have over or close to 200 million. You will have over 200,000 subscribers, and you will be piss broke, jerking yourself off for a couple views on YouTube and still living in your parents' house. If you would have told me all that before I started, I would have said, well, I already knew this was the dumbest thing ever to do, but now I know it's like actually suicide. No, I'm not doing this. Period. Right. I'm a buy the book kind of guy. I'm like a go after it, grind, whatever, clearly. And even me would have been like, no, like I have to be able to eat, like that's crazy. So I am very glad that I didn't know things. But to try to answer your question as best I can, the original part of it, which is like, what do I actually wish I knew? That's a really hard question. I don't have a lot of time to sit back and think about in fact, like no time to sit back and think about what I've done. So I'm the worst person to ask that question
Sure.
because I really live for today. But
yeah, that's okay. We don't have to. I think you gave what I was looking for there. That is a really good response because you are right there. People, they want something now. And we live in a world where we talk about YouTube shorts and TikTok. Our attention spans are awful. And we have these things in our hands all the time and we're connected to them and we're not really connected to human beings anymore. And so, man, the creative and creator space has changed so much from the decade when I started 10 years ago to where you could put something on YouTube and people would sit and actually watch and listen. And you wouldn't have to try to get their squirrel brain and say, listen, watch here, capture now. And so, no, I completely resonate with what you're saying. And I agree with that completely. I want to ask you in closing now.
You know what?
Go ahead.
I have a good answer for you. This is it's a simple one. It's not a big one, but this is a good answer. I just thought of this. I wish I knew to just let YouTube do what it does with ads. Okay. So when YouTube tells you that they want to computerize putting in X number of ads, just do what they say. Because first of all, they're not going to show those ads to many people because people's behavior proves that they're going to click off or something. But the people who don't click off, they will show it to them. And YouTube wants you to do what they want you to do when it comes to like the metadata and stuff like that.
Yes.
Don't try to reinvent the wheel. For a long, my friend Danny Jones from the Concrete Podcast figured this out about a year ago. And then we talked about it like a few months ago and it really started to change the game for me. I would always just put in like, oh, I should only put in a few ads and I put them in myself. Now, just whatever YouTube does, I do. And the few people who complain about it, I say, take it up with YouTube. Sorry. Like it has completely changed my channel because now YouTube can actually make money on my videos. I also was making a lot less money because I've never prioritized money with this podcast. Actually, I will admit it to a fault. Like there are people including you, who would yell at me for certain things, and you should. Like, I'm an idiot.
Yeah, just
one of those things.
Hearing your answer to the monetization option, just like hearing you where you are right now, it makes me kind of angry, because like someone with as much success as you have, it's not even the views or the subscribers. You've got an engaged community, which at the end of the day, when it comes to monetizing content, I don't care about how many millions of views you get. You have an actual like if you go to your videos and your long form podcast, people are commenting like crazy, whether it be because of how divisive it is or how controversial it is or whatever it may be. You should be monetizing at a 3, 4, 5x level than what you are right now. So,
yeah.
So I certainly agree with that. And so it's good that we're having this kind of live on conversation here. And I want to say this too, as we close out. I think of podcasting as, you hear the phrase, I don't know if you've ever heard of this, pod fading, where people start podcasts or they start YouTube and they get to like episode 6 or 7 or video 9 or 10,
yeah.
and they fade off, right? Like you say, there's a ton of podcasts. Everybody and his brother has a podcast. You're right. Everybody and his brother starts a podcast, but very few of them actually ever follow through.
Yeah.
And if any of you listening have ever kind of tinkered around with day trading, and reading stock charts and things, like they talk about the run, right? You have the dips and the ebbs and the flows, and you kind of have like a zone of resistance here. Once that kind of candle gets above the zone of resistance, it just takes off, right? And you can get in the money, right? Before it flushes out. I think of that with podcasting. I'm so thankful that I didn't quit this podcast when I wanted to, because I wanted to quit at like episode 21 when my mom and my grandma and my wife, they were the only ones listening to the podcast. Then episode 100, I got approached by my first sponsor and I made $4,000 that first month just from that one sponsor. I'm so thankful that I did not do that, right? Because the people who come to my show, they're advertising on my podcast. They have a community that's engaged, that trusts me. They listen to me 45 minutes to an hour every single week, whether they're walking, they're running, whatever it is, and they listen to you for multiple hours every week, and to talk about these controversial and fun topics that you talk about. So, man, Julian, this has been an awesome conversation. I could ask you a ton more questions. Maybe we can do a follow-up part 2 when you reach 1 million subscribers or whatever it is, but you're killing it. Let my audience know where they can reach out to you and find you on the internet.
Oh, thank you, man. I appreciate that. This has been a lot of fun. I am Julian Dorey on YouTube, and you can type that in. You can type in Julian Dorey to pretty much every platform: YouTube, Spotify, Apple, TikTok. It'll come up. But yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time, and I might need to talk to you about brands.
Absolutely.
You might be the hookup. Holy shit.
Yeah, we might could help you out here. Julian, thanks again, and we'll go ahead and cut it off here. But thanks again for coming on the podcast, and we'll talk to you next time.
Awesome, man. Thank you.